Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We're continuing in learning the book, Likuti Torah. And in it, it's talking about one of the main causes of the suffering of the Jewish people in what we call exile. Probably most of the Jewish people have no idea what this means to be in exile, the word exile, because they don't know anything else. Because they don't know anything else. But the fact of the matter is, the fact of the matter is, we're in deep exile. In deep exile. Why are we in? What does it mean? One of the signs that we're in exile is that the temple is destroyed. We have no holy temple, which every normal human being will say, so what? So what? So we don't have a holy temple. What's the point of the holy temple? So the holy temple, sacrifices, right? Sacrifice. That's it. That's what we're missing. That makes us in exile because we don't have sacrifices. We don't have sacrifices. What's the what the there's cows that get killed on the road, road kill. That's good enough. What do you have to have sacrifices? That's what the holy temple is. It says no. The fact is that it's really the fact is really true. We're so far away from what it was in the holy temple that we don't appreciate what there was. And in fact, is even when there was the holy temple, we also didn't appreciate it. What was there in the holy temple? First of all, nobody felt alone. No one felt alone. Everyone felt that they're being created by God. Everyone felt I'm being created for a purpose. So it was much more difficult in those days to feel depressed, to feel meaningless. On the other hand, egotism, because you didn't feel alone, so you could take that two ways. Thank God he's creating me, or I must be pretty important. God is creating me. So they did do sins. Yes. In the first temple, there were people that did pretty serious sins. Now, it's not the idea that everybody was in the streets just doing these, murdering and licentiousness and worshiping idols and things like that. But those things definitely did exist. And because they did exist, as therefore, the first temple was destroyed. The first temple was destroyed. But the Jewish people repented from that. They repented. They said, okay, we realized we made a big mistake. We lost our identity. 70 years later, God said, okay, you cleaned your act up, give you another chance. 70 years later, they built the second temple. And the second temple even lasted longer than the first temple. It was even bigger than the first temple. But it was bigger than the first. But there was a big problem, and that is that people hated each other. People hated each other, and they hated each other for no reason. Jews hated each other, and that lasts till this very day. And the reason is because when you hate someone, you don't feel you're doing anything against God. You don't feel you're doing any sin. You're not hate. You're not going against God. You just can't stand this other person. People only saw the bad in other people. They only saw the bad. There was contention, and there was no redeeming factor. Sometimes you can see bad things in people, but there's something that redeems. For instance, parents who, God forbid, that their children become criminals. So the parents always have some love hidden in their children. If a child would come knocking on the door and say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Please forgive me. I know you won't believe me. The father will receive it. Take him back. Take him back. Usually not. So there's always some redeeming, something to mitigate, to water down the hatred. Right? If there's love. And the Jewish people didn't use that. It was just too much pure hatred. And what does it mean, pure hatred? Everybody has some good in them, But the reason was that everyone overlooked the good because they wanted to hate. They wanted to hate. People felt, the idea say, threatened by everybody else. And so there was a lot of hatred. Hatred. Says the Rebbe, what's so bad about hatred? And it says somewhere in the Torah that's such a big sin. Well, Rabbi Akiva said, for instance, that someone asked him, what's the whole Torah? He said, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the whole Torah. And when Hillel was asked the same question, Hillel was asked by a non-Jew. It says that he explained to him in a little bit more practical. What's not good to you, don't do to others. what's not good to you, and what is one thing that everybody doesn't want, everybody doesn't want, is when others hate him, when others see his faults. People don't like that. People don't like that. That's the thing that's common to all mankind. People don't like it if others look at them negatively. They don't like it. Sometimes you can overcome if you have the majority people that vote for you, so you know they're going to have opposition, but people don't like it. That's a general thing. So that thing that you don't like to others, namely seeing that you don't want other people to do to you, namely that other people see your faults, which that's a thing that's just, how do you say, disliked by everybody, is don't do it to others. Don't see other people's faults. But they couldn't do that. So it says when there is, this is such an essential thing that it says that when Jews do get along with one another, and you have to remember that God made Jews, especially, he made everybody like this, but especially Jews, that every Jew is different from every other Jew. Every Jew is different from every other Jew in a very, how do you say, a very exaggerated way. Oh, very exaggerated way. You can see it's really quite amazing. You start talking to Jews, everybody has their own opinion, everybody has their own idea, even the same family, even the same political party, brothers and etc. Everybody has some different way of looking at it. Really, all humanity is that way. But by the Jews, it's really exaggerated. It's really, dominant thing. I'll just say one small thing. There was, I read once, somebody showed me a paper, a newspaper. Showed me a newspaper. Or maybe I read this. Anyway, so they interviewed a Roman. There used to be a lot of Roman from Romania, a Romanian worker here. There used to be a lot of them here. Now there's not so many. They come from other countries, but anyway, there's a lot of foreign workers here in Israel. In Israel, so there used to be the Palestinians, whatever you want to call them, the but they just murdered their owners, so nobody trusts them, so they didn't let them in. But there used to be a lot. They don't work here. Anyway, so this Romanian guy, they interviewed him, and he said he just finished working here for 2 or 3 years, and that he's really very happy. He was very happy, especially liked to work for the religious people. He said they always paid him on time and they treated him, nicely, with respect and everything. He said, but he wants to say one thing. He said that in Israel everybody's different. He said in Romania there's like 20 different types of people, and they all act pretty, all the doctors are pretty much the same, and the lawyers are the same, the left and the right, the political, whatever it is, they're pretty much, at least on the surface of things, pretty much are the same. So, but he worked with these religious people. For instance, he worked for Hasidic bells, for Hasidic Gur. So they all dress pretty much the same. He said, and you figure that, if they dress the same, they must have the same ideas. And of course, they all do. They're all Hasidic bells and they're all Gur. He said, but every place, everyone was different. And all the children were different. And the older people were different. And everybody that he met, they were different. They had different personalities and different, the ways of talk, different jokes and different this. So that's the nature of the Jews, that everybody is they say in a very blatant way, if you want to call it, everyone is different. So everyone's different. It's very hard for everybody to get along. Why did God do this? He says, well, on one hand, that's right. But when they do get along, it's like an orchestra. If you have an orchestra with like 100 clarinets, so, 76 trombones or whatever. So nobody, it's no big deal if they all sound the same. They all play the same thing. But if everything is different, so either it can be terrible or it can be really amazing, and that's the idea of the Jews. If the Jews get along together, then it's very amazing. Not just despite their differences, that's also something, but because of their difference, everybody appreciates everybody else. So it says not only that, but when that happens, there's a unity in God's name. Now, what is God's name? God's name is the creative force that creates the world, and also the creative force that gives the Torah. God. There's the essence of God, and then there's God's name. God's name is how he relates, like a person's name, how God relates to what seems to be outside. Now in Hasidut Chabad, we've learned over and over and over again, and maybe that's the main lesson that we can get from Likuti Torah, is what they call Bitla Olamot, that all of the worlds don't really exist. They're all being created all the time. They have no stable, if you want to call it, existence on their own, except that God is creating them. But that's pretty stable. But nevertheless, it's not as though they're independent existences that they just live according to the laws of nature, which will never change, which are, it's not so. The world is being created by God all the time, and God can change, even though according to the Torah, it's not going to change. So it comes out that the fact that God is creating the world is more stable than the laws of nature. But it's a different type of a stability. It's a stability that we can't take for granted. It's a stability that we can't take for granted. The laws of nature, who cares? Who cares what the if Newton was right or if Kepler was right of this? So who cares? If the world works the way it works? The nuclear. What is it? NASA. Maybe they care. They want to make their formulas, but we don't care. But if God is creating us, that's pretty important. And if we feel that God is really creating us, then we know that we're not the boss, that God is. So if the Jews get together, then they become an example of godliness in the world. And if not, then they become an example of selfishness in the world, which that's what destroys the world. So it says, if Jews don't get along together, then God's name is not whole. Or in the language of the Midrash, the upper family and the lower family. The upper family are the first two letters of God's name, Yud Hey, which we said that Chachma and Bina, that's mainly when Jews learn the Torah. Because this sounds a little bit fantastic, but the fact is that the world is being created by God constantly, and it's being created for the Jews to improve it. That's why we're here. That's why all the trees and the bugs and the things are for the Jews to improve the world, every aspect of the world. Every planet and every galaxy and every atom and every quark and everything, it's all being created for the Jews to reveal in the world that there's a creator, and that this physical world is infinitely more important than all of the upper worlds. That's what the Jews are supposed to do. That's called God's name, how God reveals himself. So the Yud and the Hey, the first two letters of God's name, that's how God reveals himself in the Torah. What about the last two letters of God's name? That's called the lower family, Familial Shalmata. This is expressed in the letters, what's called Vav Hey, the last two letters of God's name, B'Shem. Because Hine, Kasiv, it is written, L'cha Hashem Gedula v'Gevura, to you, God, is the Gedula and Gevura. We say it in our prayers every day. This is a statement made by King David, a song made by King David when the Ark came back. The Ark was taken, the Palestine or whatever, the Palestine, they defeated the Jews in a battle, and they took the Ark in captivity. It's a whole long story. You can read, what is it, in the beginning of the book of where is it? In the book of Kings, I think. One second, I'll tell you. No, this must be in book of Samuel, or it's one. I'm sorry. 1 minute. I'm sorry. Or it is in the book of Chronicles. I will tell you in 1 minute. Let me just look over here, and I will find it. I'm sorry that I didn't. It's a song that was said by King David when he brought the thing back, and it is in. That's right. It's in the Chronicles. It's the first book of Chronicles, chapter 29. So the Ark comes back. King David sings this beautiful song to God. What does he say? That to you, God, is the greatness, is the power, is the beauty, is the victory, is the glory, everything in the heavens and the earth. To you, God, is the kingship. So he's praising, King David is praising God. And like I said, we say this every day in our prayers, right before we say the song that the Jews sang going over the sea, after they left the sea. So it says that King David, he praised God with 6 praises: Gedula, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Kol B'Shamayim V'Oretz, L'cha Mamlacha. These are the six emotions of emotional traits of God. So God's vav hey, that's God's intellect, if you want to call it. And the vav, that's the yud hey, that's the yud and the hey of God. And the vav of and the hey of God, this is God's emotions. Now, I know this sounds a little bit weird. I mean, God is supposed to be infinite, right? God is infinite. But if you say that God is infinite, meaning that he's removed from the world, so that opens the door to idolatry. Because if God is outside of the world, then who's controlling the world? Who's making the wind blow and the rivers flow? And who exactly answers our prayers? Who is what's God is so far away? Does he hear us? So we say no, it's not so. That God is really involved in the world. How? Because God has a personality, and God's personality, that's what's called the 10 sfirot. And in the Zohar, the 10 sfirot are called the secret of faith. In order to believe in God, you have to believe that God is not just outside of the world, but God is also involved in the world. He's creating the world. He cares about the world. God has a personality. And the 10 sfirot, this is God's personality. So the yud and the hey, that we said, that's God's, so to speak, the intellect. That's the Torah. And the vav and the hey, the last two letters of God's name, the God's name, that represents God's personality. So it says, that is hine, that is the upper emotions of God, how God reacts to the world, how God acts or reacts in the world. Sometimes God shows his love, sometimes God shows his power, sometimes God shows his beauty. Okay, ready? Yesh gam ken 7 emotions of bad. Remember, God is making a world over here. The world is a place in which God wants there to be a battle between what we choose, bad and good. That's the battle. This world is a place of free choice. That's man. Man, the essence of man is to choose. The angels, they don't choose. It says that there's some places that says the angels do have a certain measure of free choice or whatever. There's certain angels that get punished with it. Anyway, let's not get into that. Essentially, angels have no free choice, and man does have free choice. Free choice means that he can choose between being selfish or being godly. In other words, let's put it this way. You may have a choice of either the creator is God or I'm God. The creation is God. What's the most real thing? That's what God is. So the most real thing is me. That's evil. The most real thing is my creator. Oh, that's right. That's good. So it says, but God made the world, that this world is a mirror image of God. Mirror image of God. So that it's a free choice. I mean, if it's obvious every time you went against God, the ground opened up and you got swallowed up, or a lightning bolt came down from, from heaven, people would say, hey, where's George? You didn't hear, he didn't keep Shabbos. And yeah, I know. You don't have, got dissolved. Yeah, dissolved. That's it. Okay, that's what happens when you don't keep the Shabbos. What are you going to do? It doesn't work that way. People can do sins and they live and they prosper and they live. That's how God made the world. That's how, it's not, we can't understand it. Lo b'yadeinu, lo b'shalvus harashoyim. It says nobody knows how to explain it, but that's the mystery of creation, what God made in the world. That's one of the mysteries. So it says that just like God has 10 aspects of his personality, especially let's say the lower emotions of God, it's also selfishness, evil, has also these 7 aspects. And the main place comes from what's called the left side of holiness. The left side of holiness is how God conceals himself. Like it says in the Zohar, the East Yamina, that there is a right side, the East Small, and there's a left side, La'ela by God. Besitra to Kedusha, on the side of holiness. Umikava small, but from the left side of God, which that's God's severity, how God, so to speak, limits his light. Mishtalshal, there comes the Nimshach Yanika, there comes a nurture for the Chitzonim. There comes a nurture to the external forces. Come on, Nahar Dinor, for instance, the river of fire. The river of fire, that's another name for hell, I guess. It comes from the sweat of the chayos of the angels, which are called the chayos kodesh. Hari Gehenom, heaven, right? Gehinnom is nithave, is created mipasolos agvuros, from the unnecessary severity of God. 1 second, let's make this a little bit bigger. Oh, there we go. And therefore, tikkun nezeh, fixing this, is by means of shetzarech liot, smaller as kolol b'yamina, the left has to be included in the right. The call of Torah and the whole Torah is on this. Let's just get this, what's going on. God is one. God is creating the world. How does God create the world? So the Bible tells us that God created the world by means of speech. What is speech? Here you have a person, a big person, right? You have a person, a human being. There's a little tiny hole in your head. It's called your mouth. And there's a lot of holes in your body. You have your ears, you have your eyes, you have your nose, right? Well, that you connect to the outside world, senses, right? But your mouth is very interesting because your mouth can speak. Speaking is very, very complicated. Speech is very, very complicated. How your tongue works and how your tongue works together with your lips and with the palate and everything. And it expresses these ideas, and like the French language is different from the Greek language, and the Greek is different from this language, and all these different languages and the way you pronounce them and different sounds you can make. It's very, very, very amazing. Speech. Well, God creates the world by means of speech. That's what it says in the Bible. And speech is very, very limited. So to speak, it's a very small hole in godliness, and comes out a voice which is even more limited. Animals, they go, so at least it comes out. A human being goes, how are you? How are you feeling today? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokim. All these words and letters and things like that, very, very complicated how it comes out. So it says, on one hand, that's amazing. The world is amazing. King David is praising God all the time about how amazing the world is and how wonderful the world is. On the other hand, it's limiting, so to speak. It's hiding God. It's hiding God. So this power of creation is really good, but on the other hand, is not only is it really bad, it's the only bad. That's what manifests bad in the world, that God is not revealed. So that's the gevura, that's this power. So that gevura, that makes bad, selfishness, separateness from God in the world. So how do we fix this up? Smaller as kolol b'yamina, the left has to be included in the right. What does it mean included in the right? Let's just take an example. Let's take an example. We're saying the whole world is created from God's severity, from God's left side, God's severity. So you can look at it this two ways. If so, then I see that if I do X and Y in the world, I feel good. So let's go for it. But it says in the Torah, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to steal. You're not supposed to lie. But these things feel good. What are you supposed to do? So it says, if you go according to what you feel, then the world is ruling. Then the left is dominant. The left severity is dominant. It hides over God. But if the right is dominant, if you use the world for what God wants, then that's called unifying the left with the right. That the world, which is basically God's left side, becomes included in God's kindness. God is creating the world from kindness. That's what the Torah, and it says the whole Torah is based on this. The whole Torah is there in order to tell you how to use this world, which seems to be very low and terrible, but how to use the world according to the Torah. That's very, very good, very important to God. Very important. That's why God is creating the world. So true, he's creating the world, and he's concealing himself, and this is God's severities and God's judgment and God's his concealment. Right? You don't see God, but he's doing it for a purpose that when we use it, we realize that God is infinitely more infinite than we could possibly imagine. He's not just relegated to be God up in the heavens or whatever, what we think God is. Like it says in the Zohar, in the beginning of the Korach, that from this, Korach, that was the sin of Korach. Remember who Korach was? This was a couple weeks ago, we learned about Korach. Korach, he brought all the Jews to rebel against Moses. Now, Korach never did anything good for the Jewish people, nothing whatsoever. Never did anything good for anybody except for himself. And Moses did everything good for everybody. He took the Jews out of Egypt, brought us the Torah. And nevertheless, Korach brought all of the Jews to rebel against Moses. Why? He didn't want the left side to be included in the right side. In other words, he didn't want the world to go according to the Torah. He said the Torah is one thing and the world is another thing. You do the commandments. Yes, that of course you have to do. It's written in the Torah. But as far as controlling yourself with your own desires and your own lusts and doing whatever, whatever is not a commandment and whatever is not forbidden, a prohibition, go for it. Go for it. In other words, your life is not to be subservient to God's will. To God's will. Your life is subservient only to what you want. That is the opposite of the Torah. The Torah says, no, every detail in the world is hiding God, and the Torah is coming to show you how to use the world to reveal the Creator, something you never dreamed of. That's the point of the Torah. And Korach said, okay, that's a good idea, but don't mess around with my desires, with my nature. You can take the world and transform it 100%. We believe every word of the Torah, but don't mess around with me. Don't tell me what to do with myself. In simple language, the Torah is for me. I'm not for the Torah. Right? The Torah can add things to me, but it can't subtract. It can't control me. Look, and therefore, Nika, that's why the Torah is called Torah Chesed. The Torah is called the Torah of kindness. Ze Yaminu Hashem. That's the right arm of God. Nadori B'koach. That's what the Jews said when they went over the sea. By means of this, Yamin Hashem Tiratz Oyev. The right hand of God, it destroys the enemy. What's the enemy? The enemy is selfishness. And when the Jews arouse the right side of God, the right hand, which that's God's love, so you realize that everything in the world is created from God's love. But also the fact that you control yourself is also because you want to express God's love. Same thing with all the punishments of the Torah. Even though they are very, very severe, right? According to the Torah, there's flogging. A person can get beaten, right? For certain sins, there's the punishment of death for sins. Person doesn't keep Shabbat, lights a match on Shabbat, you're stoned to death. That's pretty severe. I mean, that, like we said before, true, nowadays there is no death punishment. And even when there was, it was almost impossible to apply it, but there still is a death punishment. It says in the Torah. So there's all these punishments. Nevertheless, it says that all the punishments, the severities of the Torah, this is really God's kindness. Sha'onish, that the punishment is that by means of that, naset tikun lenefesh, that the soul gets fixed up. Kamayim Razalik, it says, Kol chayav krisos shalaku niftaru. It says anyone who the punishment is being cut off from heaven and they get beaten, right? You get the lashes. It says that the punishment of being cutting off from heaven is is taken away. Even the punishment of death, of based in punishments, people were, and let's say for instance, a person did not keep Shabbat. I mean, a short resume, a short the summary of what it takes to get killed in Judaism, right? And let's say a person, he lights a fire on Shabbat, so it's punishable by death. How does he get punished? So first of all, there has to be two witnesses that saw him do it. And second of all, the witnesses, they can't be passive. They have to be active. They have to warn him first. They have to warn him that what you're doing is punishable by death. And after that, immediately he has to say, I know, and that's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it. And then the witnesses, even if all this is there, the witnesses have to be that they're not relatives, and they have to be that they are reliable witnesses. There's all laws. If one of them was a gambler or something, then he's out. And it has to be that there's no counter witnesses. Other witnesses come and say, you didn't see this, right? We were there and we saw something else, right? That he didn't kill him. It was George that killed him or something like that. Then that's it. They throw the case out. Or if they come and they say to the witnesses, hey, you said on January 3rd that Shmerel killed Yehuda. It's not so. On January 3rd, you were with us in San Francisco. You weren't even there. Then they kill the witnesses. They kill the first witnesses. So it's almost impossible to kill somebody according to Judaism. But let's say everything is there and they kill the person. So you're coming to, okay, it's almost impossible to kill him, but they killed him. What are they killing him for? He lit a match on Shabbat. What? Why kill a person because of that? He didn't hurt anybody. It says, because God said you shouldn't do it. And he knew it. And he purposely lit a light on Shabbos. The sin is not that he lit a candle on Shabbos. The sin is that he went against his creator. He knew it was wrong. We warned him. And he said, I know and I don't care. So it says when a person, the punishment is carried out. So it says that it cleans the person, like it says about Achan. Achan was a person, he was with Joshua. Anyway, he did a sin. It was punishable by death. He stole something. Yarechacha Hashem hayom hazeh, hayom hazeh ata achur. Today you are cursed. Ve'iyata achur l'olam haba, but you're not cursed after you get punished. So Nimsa comes out to owners that the punishment, Zel the Taken Nafsho comes out to fix up the person's soul, which is not the case, the sin itself. The sin itself is worse than death. Excuse me, like it says, at the Chayim, at the Tov, at the Mavet, at the Ra. It says in the Torah, God said in what is it? In Parshat Nitzavim. Nitzavim, it says, I am putting in front of you today the life and good and death and bad. So these are four different things. Life is good, right? It says no, life is one thing and good is another thing. Good is better than life. And death is one thing. Death is pretty bad. But Ra is worse than death. Nimsa, so it comes out that Ra, to do a bad thing against God, this is worse than death. So it comes out that death takes away the blemish of Ra, bad. Like I said before, what's important to God? What's important to God is right now, what we do in this world. That's higher than all the other worlds, even the raising of the dead. It's like what you do right now. Now, your whole life you did sins. Now you can fix it up. Live in the now, in the present, and you can fix it up. You can fix it up. Because now is the most important thing to God. So if a person does good now, that can fix up all the bad that he ever did. But what if a person does bad now? So it says that's even worse than death. That's even worse than death. And that's why there's all these punishments and everybody dies. That's why all the punishments in the Torah to fix up the bad that people did now. That's a blemish, eternal blemish. You misuse the present moment. You misused your life. You misused the fact that you're being created. That's bad news. So all the punishments are really only to fix this up because God doesn't want to punish people. Nimsa, so it comes out that the Torah is the left side of God, is included in the right side, which is not the case. The punishment which was before the giving of the Torah, this was just pure severity. Like, for instance, the generation of the flood, that says the generation of the flood, they got punished, but nevertheless, they have no place in the world to come. Before the Torah was given, because before the Torah was given, there was pure vengeance. God took pure vengeance. After the Torah was given, it doesn't happen that many anymore. The Cain Bador Flaga, and also in the generation that built the Tower of Babel. They built the Tower of Babel in order to revolt against God. It was a big Kabbalistic or whatever is it, metaphysical war that they made against God. They were like big sorcerers over there. And they built the Tower of Babel. So it says that God scattered them all around. It says they have no place in the world to come. It's in the end of even the Mishnayot in Sanhedrin, the chapter 10. The Nimsa, so comes out of Onesh, Lo haya b'shvil tikun nafsho. Before the Torah was given, the punishment was not to fix the world up. It was just to get rid of these people. Zeu gavuras gamuros. It was total severity of God. That was before the Torah was given. But after the Torah was given, 1 minute, which is now, this is what's called smola. Okay, that was before the Torah was given. 1 minute. Oh. This level, which was the left, included in the right, which that's good, we said. That's called shalom. That's called peace, the pemilia shalmata, in the lower last two letters of God's name. This is sweetening up the severity of God, namely the world, with chasadim, with God's love. Okay, so what are we learning over here? We're learning God made the world in order that we should fix the world up. One of the main ways of fixing up the world is by means of the Torah and our following the Torah, but doing good deeds. Using the world, this terrible, low, frustrating, tempting, the discouraging world, and using it according to the way that the Creator wants, and that makes a beautiful world. All of a sudden, you see that the world is worthwhile. This is hamtakas of gavuras b'chasadim. That's fixing up the gavura with kindness. I don't know. Maybe I'll give you an example. I want to give you an example. What does it mean? Fix up the gavuras, fix up the bad things with kindness. Fixing it up. And the Torah is called kindness. Torah's chesed. I know I told you this story before, but I want to tell it again because I think it's a very beautiful story. I think it really illustrates this. It's written in Professor Viktor Frankl's book. It's written actually a couple places in a couple of his books, but the main book, the most popular book of his, and he says that once a lady called him up in the middle of the night and said she wants to commit suicide, but her friends convinced her before she committed suicide to call Dr. Franco and to talk to him, and that maybe he can talk her out of it. So it was 3 a.m. He has to wake up at, let's say, at 5. And he went to sleep at, 2. So he was a very busy person. He ran this whole big, huge hospital. So the lady goes on about, her problems and why she wants to commit suicide and this, and he asked her a couple questions and he said a couple of words. And finally, after about a half an hour, he said, listen, ma'am, I really want to listen to you, but I'm very tired and I have to wake up early in the morning. So I really can't devote proper attention to what you're saying right now, but I really want to. Listen, do me a favor. I'm the head of this big clinic in Vienna. That's where he was. He said, go up whatever is, the 3rd floor and say that Dr. Franco said to Letterman, I'll tell my secretary, as soon as you come, I'll finish with whatever patient I have, whatever I'm doing, and I'll sit and I'll listen to you. Right? I promise, come. So she said, okay. Hung up the phone. Next day she came, the appointed time, and she saw Viktor Frankl, and he said, okay, now I'm free. I slept a little bit. I can listen. She said, that's okay. I decided I'm not going to commit suicide. He said, did I say something last night? I was very tired. I don't remember what I said. I just, what did I say to convince you? Not that she said, oh, doctor, you didn't say anything. I said, but I said to myself that in this terrible world, and that's why I want to leave it. Everything is bad. But if there's someone who's willing at 2 o'clock in the morning to listen to some crazy lady talk for half an hour, so it must be that the world is not so bad. So I decided I'm going to live. So what do we see? Here, this woman is crazy. That is because the world is bad, and the world is a bad place, and it's enough to make anybody crazy, the world. But in this world, there's one person that's good, and he's willing to have patience, he's willing to listen to what I say. So it ended up that because of the bad things, because this lady was sick, and because she was crazy, and because she called the doctor up at 2 a.m, who does something like that, and drives him nuts for a half an hour saying all sorts of who knows what crazy things. And because of these bad things, it all of a sudden gave a whole new value to his kindness and his goodness. So that's what's called fixing up the negative, fixing up the gevura, the severities with kindness. And it even more, it elevates the severity, it elevates the bad things, right? If she wasn't a crazy person, she wouldn't have called him up at 2 a.m. She wouldn't have talked to him for half an hour. He would have said, "Listen, lady, I'm tired. I want." So because she was crazy, so it ended up, it revealed a whole new good type of thing. And that's what the whole purpose of the Torah is. The world is a terrible place, but the Torah takes its time to tell you how to deal with the world. And that's also according to the Torah. We said that connecting the Yud and the Hey, that's according to the Torah. That's what's got the plan for creation. But also the Torah also fixes up the physical world, the last 2 letters of God's name. Because in the Torah, it says, Miyamino Eish Dat. It says from God's right hand is a fiery religion. And that from God's right hand is a fiery religion. So we have God's right hand, that's kindness, but fire, that's the left side. Eish Shechora al Gabi Eish Lavan. It says the Torah is black fire on top of white fire. That's God's severity and God's kindness. That's the first 2 of the 10 commandments. I am God that took you out of Egypt. Commandment number 1. Commandment number 2, you should not have any other gods. That's the whole source of kindness and severity. I am God, your God, means I'm creating you. 4th of the 10 commandments. God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, 7th day he rested. I am God that creates you. I am God that took the Jews out of Egypt. I am God that gave them the Torah. Pure kindness. Pure kindness. And then afterwards it says, and you shouldn't have any other gods. That's severity. The Kach Gam also called Likuti Torah. That's what the Torah is. All the details of the Torah. All the laws of the Torah, this is very, very severe, very, very concentrated will of God. Only by means of this, Yuchshar will be okay. Be'im lav, and if not, pasul, it's no good. Right? You decide you want to make a sukkah on Sukkot. And instead of putting grass on the top of it, you decide you want to put gold, strings of gold on the top. It's got to be beautiful. It's no good. The sukkah is not good. And your next door neighbor, he has 4 walls, and he put just old branches and all sorts of things on the top of it, right? And that's a commandment. Why? Because the Torah is kind, but it's also God's severity. You have to do exactly what it says, and if not, then it's no good. And Gavuros Elu, this is the Tachlit Chesed. But the fact is, so all these little details in the Torah, that's the ultimate expression of God's kindness. That by means of this, God is revealed in the world. Like the human body, right? The human body. Human body is wonderful. It's a big blessing. Here we have a human body. We have a heart and a lung. You know how the heart works? It's just incredible, right? And all of us, we have working hearts and lungs and livers and spleens and digestive systems. And it's just amazing, incredible miracles. It's just God's kindness and love. But if you look into it, you take a course in anatomy, then it opens the door to all sorts of paranoia. Wow, the heart is so complicated. Ooh, I hope my left ventricle is okay. I've got my right ventricle. What about my auricle? Ooh, what about the right auricle? Left auricle? What about all these valves? All these, right? The blood that goes. What about these big vessels that go in, and right? And this, you start to learn about all these details. You can go crazy, right? Leave me alone. I'm thinking about my nervous system. I got so many nerves in my leg. I got to think about them that they don't. I got to worry that they don't work. You'll go out of your mind. It makes no sense, right? But all these little details, but they're details. And if one of them goes wrong, that's what doctors are for. It could be tremendous pain, tremendous this. And so, if so, it comes out that what is the human body? Is it a sign of God's severity or of God's kindness? Well, it's very severe, but on the other end, it's alive. So it says the same thing is the Torah. The Torah is very complicated, but that's the sign of God's life. That's what it means. The Torah says from God's right arm comes fire. Right arm, that's God's kindness. But the Torah is also fire. Everything is limited, exact. All this happens because we have to remember that the Torah is God's. It's not just a Jewish book. It's not just connected to the spiritual levels or the upper heavens or whatever. No, the Torah is pure godliness that creates all the heavens. The reason for the creation of the heavens, that's the Torah. So by learning the Torah, draws down a light which is above the whole entire ishtalshalut, means the chain of creation, and from them is drawn to be his kalus chesed gevura. And it was the whole thing depends on God's kindness, on God's blessing. We have to do what we can, but in the end, God's blessing is the one that makes the peace. God's blessing is the one that makes life. Even though that these two things are opposites, all the little laws and details of the Torah, and also the love of God in the Torah. These are two opposites. And also the world, which is so limited, and God is creating the world. This is unlimited. How do we unite these two things together? By a level of godliness which is above both of them. The essence of God. And that, in a way, is the purpose of prayer. Liot smola ichlala b'mina, that the left should be included in the right. Excuse me, 1 minute. In the right. The Rav Chesed and God's infinite kindness, nota kalapi Chesed, can move the whole business, the whole world, to the side of love. And there'll be Shalom Yaseli, there'll be peace. It's kalos amidos, that there'll be included all these emotions, like it says, God and his vessels and his creations are one. That they're all united once. Okay, now what has this got to do with me and you? Here we're talking about what God does and learning the Torah. That's very nice. But that's not really the topic of this mimer. This is only to understand the topic. What's the topic? How bad it is if there's not peace between Jews and Jews. If the Jews don't respect one another. If the Jews don't get along one with the other, that's the worst. Arguments are very good. Arguments is 100%. But that there's hatred, that's the point. Hatred, that's bad. Hatred is bad. Okay, what's this got to do with anything? Up to now, we've learned that God creates the world in a way that it is filled with disunity. Everything is opposites. The world is opposite God. All the details are opposite God's oneness. The severity of the world is opposite God's kindness. But by learning the Torah, it draws the essence of God into the world and it makes unity. Okay, what's this got to do with me and you? Here we've talked about the Torah, about the creation, about God. What about, how does the Jewish people fit into this business? That's what we're going to learn, God willing, tomorrow.